Do you realize you're parked illegally here? Why are you ignoring the restriction?
Can you point to the visible signage or legal basis for that claim?
Are you refusing to accept this citation and comply?
I'm complying, but I'm asking you to state the exact ordinance you're enforcing.
Have you ever been looked at and judged before you even had the chance to speak a single word? It is a heavy, invisible burden that many carry every single day. People glance your way, and through the cloudy lens of their own preconceived notions, they instantly write a complete fictional biography about who you are, what you are capable of, and how easily you can be pushed around. They make a calculation based purely on bias. But what happens when their arrogant assumptions collide head-on with someone who quietly holds the master keys to the very system they are trying to abuse? Welcome to a story about the ultimate misjudgment, a tale where unchecked authority meets brilliant silent preparation. If you enjoy stories where arrogance is dismantled by absolute, undeniable accountability, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments down below, where are you tuning in from today? Now let's dive into a moment where a simple, everyday errand unraveled a massive web of corruption and changed a city forever. The late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the pavement as Dr. Clara Jenkins navigated her sedan through the bustling downtown corridor. She was a woman who lived her life with exact precision, a trait born from her profession as a leading constitutional scholar and the primary author of the state's sweeping police accountability legislation. But right now, she wasn't thinking about legal precedents or legislative drafts. She was entirely focused on her mother's health. On the passenger seat rested a small pharmacy bag containing a newly adjusted dosage of vital medication. Her mother's health required strict management, and Clara had made this specific detour nearly a dozen times over the past few months. It was meant to be a simple drop-off. A quick visit, a cup of tea, and a review of her mother's dietary logs. Clara scanned the crowded street for a place to leave her car. Her mother's apartment building was just a short walk away, but the curbs were heavily congested. Finally, she spotted a gap. It was a long stretch of concrete right next to a city utility fixture, an old water connection point meant for emergency services. The metal was heavily rusted, the red paint entirely chipped away by decades of harsh weather, and the curb itself lacked any brightly colored warning stripes or restricted parking signage. Being a woman who understood that the world is often unforgiving to those who leave things to chance, Clara didn't just guess the distance. She reached into her console, pulled out a small, retractable measuring device, and stepped out into the mild breeze. She calculated the exact distance from the rusted metal base to her vehicle's bumper. It was well beyond the legal requirement. In fact, she knew the municipal code by heart. She knew that unpainted curbs and unmaintained utility fixtures carried specific exemptions she had personally helped draft into law to prevent predatory ticketing. Satisfied, she tucked the device away and grabbed the pharmacy bag. Before she could even step onto the sidewalk, the sharp, aggressive chirp of a patrol vehicle's siren cut through the ambient city noise. Two men stepped out of the cruiser. Officer Marcus Thorne was a heavily built man whose posture radiated an unearned certainty. His partner, Officer Evan Hayes, was younger, moving with the hesitant shadow of a subordinate who simply follows the leader's rhythm. Thorne approached with his ticket pad already drawn, a clear indication that the outcome of this interaction had been decided before he even unbuckled his seatbelt. Clara stood calmly, holding her university identification badge and the pharmacy bag. She offered a polite greeting, but Thorne completely ignored her demeanor. He immediately pointed at her vehicle, declaring that she was parked illegally, the penalty would be severe, and a tow truck was already en route unless she accepted the massive fine without a word of protest. With the practiced, steady tone of a professor addressing a challenging student, Clara clearly recited the exact traffic ordinance, detailing the specific subsections regarding unpainted curbs and decayed municipal markers. She calmly explained her exact measurements, demonstrating that she was entirely within her legal rights. Thorne's jaw clenched. He was not used to being educated on the sidewalk. He pulled out his own measuring tool, checked the distance, and saw that she was absolutely correct. Yet his pen continued to move across the ticket pad. He coldly stated that the law did not care about a driver's personal interpretation. Have you ever tried to calmly explain the truth to someone who has already committed to misunderstanding you? It is an incredibly frustrating experience. Let me know in the comments how you handle situations where someone refuses to listen to reason. As Thorne continued writing, Clara's eyes shifted to the small, blinking black box mounted to the center of his uniform. It was an automated recording device. She knew its technical specifications intimately because she had written the legislative mandate requiring its use. She knew that any interaction lasting beyond a specific time threshold automatically triggered an encrypted upload to an independent state investigative database. She calmly stated this fact aloud, ensuring her voice was clearly captured on the audio track. When Clara spoke those words, Thorne paused. He looked at her face, really looked at her this time, and a flicker of dark recognition crossed his eyes. He remembered her. Years ago, Clara had served on an independent review board and provided expert testimony regarding Thorne's history of escalating minor stops into aggressive encounters, specifically targeting vulnerable demographics in certain neighborhoods. Her testimony had severely delayed his career advancement. This was no longer a routine stop. This was retribution. Thorne grabbed his radio and manufactured a narrative out of thin air. He called dispatch, claiming he had an aggressive, non-compliant individual attempting to obstruct a lawful investigation. He requested immediate backup. Clara did not move. She did not raise her voice. She kept her hands perfectly visible and stated for the blinking camera that she was fully cooperative, offering zero physical resistance and simply invoking her legal right to question an unlawful citation. Hayes stepped behind her, pulling his restraints. The cold, heavy metal clamped down around Clara's wrists. The pressure was intense, intentionally tightened to the point of biting into her skin, a physical assertion of dominance. She clearly narrated the excessive tightness for the recording, noting the high probability of bruising. Thorne thoroughly searched her belongings. He found her university credentials, and beneath them, a stack of heavily annotated legal documents bearing the state government's seal. Her name was printed at the top of every page as the chief constitutional consultant. Thorne looked at the documents, looked at Clara, and placed everything on the hood of his cruiser. He then casually tossed her mother's vital medication right beside it. He made no effort to secure the items. He simply pushed Clara toward the back of his vehicle, locking her inside the heavy metal cage. As they drove away, Clara watched through the reinforced glass as the wind caught the pharmacy receipt, blowing it down the street, leaving her mother's medicine sitting on the cold metal hood of a parked car. But Clara did not panic. She sat in the back of the cruiser, feeling the painful bite of the steel around her wrists, knowing that every single second of their misjudgment, their arrogance, and their bias was being captured, time-stamped, and permanently secured in a cloud server they could not touch. The holding cell in the precinct was a bleak, windowless room that smelled of harsh chemicals and exhausted spirits. It was a place designed to make you feel incredibly small. Clara sat quietly on a rigid metal bench, examining the deep red indentations marking her wrists. She wasn't alone. In the corner sat a young woman, practically curled into herself, her eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and profound stress. The young woman introduced herself as Maya. Maya looked at Clara and immediately recognized the specific despair of a fraudulent arrest. Maya explained that several months ago, she had been arrested on the exact same street by the exact same officers for parking near a similarly unmarked utility fixture. But the arrest was only the beginning of Maya's nightmare. After her brief time in jail, she was handed over to a private third-party compliance agency named Summit Compliance Solutions. Maya explained the brutal mathematics of this system. Her initial minor fine morphed into court costs, which then multiplied into mandatory supervision fees, monthly administrative charges and late penalties. Maya was a nursing student and a single mother. When she had to choose between paying for her child's emergency medical needs and paying the compliance agency, the agency heavily penalized her. A fabricated parking violation had snowballed into a crushing financial debt, forcing her to abandon her education just to work extra shifts to keep herself out of prison. Clara listened, her brilliant legal mind shifting gears from victim to investigator. She gently asked Maya a series of highly specific questions. How many other people did Maya know in this exact situation? What neighborhoods were they from? Who was the assigned supervisor at the compliance agency? The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Thorne and Hayes were deliberately targeting specific neighborhoods, areas populated by hard-working people who lacked the immediate financial resources to hire attorneys. They would issue completely baseless citations, escalate the situation to justify an arrest, and funnel these vulnerable individuals directly into the waiting jaws of Summit Compliance Solutions. It wasn't just poor policing, it was a highly organized, predatory financial extraction machine. While Clara and Maya sat in that bleak cell outlining a massive criminal conspiracy, the invisible gears of justice were already turning. Miles away, in the secure server rooms of the state's investigative bureau, Thorne's recording finished its automated upload. Because Clara had meticulously designed the system to flag specific keywords and sudden escalations, the file was instantly routed to the urgent queue of a senior state investigator. Imagine designing a trap to catch a predator and then becoming the bait that finally triggers it. Do you think you would have the mental fortitude to stay as calm as Clara did? Let me know your thoughts down below. The state investigator opened the file, expecting a standard dispute. Instead, she watched a masterclass in constitutional law being delivered by a perfectly calm professor, followed by a shocking display of intentional, retaliatory abuse of power. The investigator saw the heavy restraints applied with malice. She saw the vital medication carelessly discarded. She saw the undeniable look of recognition on Thorne's face. Within an hour, the State Bureau was fully mobilized. They ran a deep background query on Thorne's recent activity. The data was damning. Dozens upon dozens of identical citations, all issued in the same few zip codes, all targeting the same demographic of people, and every single victim funneled exclusively to Summit Compliance Solutions. The financial records took a little longer to unearth, but when they did, the final nail was driven into the coffin. The compliance agency was operated by a man who shared Thorne's last name. It was his brother. Thorne was receiving massive covert quarterly payouts from the very agency he was feeding his victims into. They had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from innocent people trying to survive. The response was absolute and overwhelming. By the time the sun came up, Clara had been quietly released, all fabricated charges completely erased from the system, accompanied by profound apologies from the precinct captain. But the storm was just making landfall. Later that morning, the state's governor and the lead prosecutor held an emergency press conference. Behind them, massive screens played the crystal-clear footage of Clara's unconstitutional arrest. The entire city watched as Thorne's arrogance was broadcast to millions. The prosecutor announced the immediate unpaid suspension of the officers, followed closely by a coordinated massive raid on the offices of Summit Compliance Solutions. State agents seized servers, financial ledgers, and internal documents that explicitly laid out monthly quotas for fraudulent arrests. It was a total systemic collapse of a predatory empire, triggered entirely because they assumed the quiet woman on the sidewalk would just bow her head and take it. Weeks later, the State Oversight Board convened in a grand, oak-paneled hearing room. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Thorne sat at the defense table, his previous swagger completely evaporated, replaced by the hollow, sunken look of a man who realized every single lie he had ever told was meticulously documented. The board read through a towering stack of charges, The financial fraud, the civil rights violations, the deeply entrenched bias that fueled the entire operation. But the true emotional weight of the hearing didn't come from the paperwork. It came from the people. Victim after victim took the microphone. Hard-working parents, students, and essential workers shared heartbreaking stories of how a single fabricated parking ticket had derailed their lives, draining their bank accounts and stealing their peace of mind. The board members listened with grim, hardened expressions. Then Maya was called to testify. She walked up to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was resolute. She recounted the suffocating weight of the debt, the terrifying choice between feeding her child and avoiding a jail cell. She detailed the exact amounts drained from her meager savings, and then she took a deep breath and delivered a revelation that made the entire room completely silent. She looked directly at Thorne and revealed a truth she had discovered while desperately researching a way to defend herself months prior. Maya shared the same father as Marcus Thorne. They were estranged half-siblings, separated by decades and family fractures. Thorne had never known her, nor had he cared to. But when he targeted her on that street, when he threw her into a system designed to crush her, he wasn't just exploiting a vulnerable citizen based on a biased assumption. He was financially ruining his own blood. He had fed his own sister to his brother's extortion machine just to buy a nicer car and take better vacations. The look of absolute horror that washed over Thorne's face was cinematic. The board members sat in stunned silence. The sheer predatory indifference of his actions was entirely unmaskable. There was no defense left to mount. The oversight board moved swiftly. Thorne was permanently stripped of his badge and barred from ever holding a position of authority again. A massive restitution fund was established, forcing the immediate repayment of every single stolen dollar back to the victims, with interest. The criminal fraud trials were scheduled to follow, promising significant prison time. But the presiding judge added one final, uniquely poetic condition to Thorne's preliminary sentencing. Before his criminal trial commenced, to fully comprehend the magnitude of his constitutional violations, Thorne was mandated to successfully complete a specific, rigorous legal ethics course at the state university. Months later, Thorne walked into a grand lecture hall carrying a notebook instead of a weapon. He took a seat in the back row, avoiding the eyes of the younger students. The doors opened, and Dr. Clara Jenkins walked to the podium. She did not gloat. She did not offer a dramatic speech of triumph. She simply opened her syllabus, looked out at the room with the calm, measured authority she had displayed on the sidewalk, and began to teach the absolute sanctity of the law. Thorne had to sit there, completely powerless, taking notes from the woman whose rights he had so casually attempted to trample. Because of Clara's unyielding composure, the city implemented sweeping new protocols. Utility markers were brightly painted. Photographic evidence became mandatory for all citations, and automated oversight alerts were deeply embedded into the municipal code to prevent anyone from ever being targeted like that again. Eventually, Clara drove back to her mother's neighborhood. She parked her sedan in the exact same spot, only this time the rusted metal had been painted a brilliant, highly visible reflective yellow. A freshly painted curb clearly marked the boundary, and a small, permanent city placard was mounted nearby, naming the intersection in honor of the new transparency laws. She grabbed the pharmacy bag, walked up to her mother's apartment, and finally sat down to enjoy that long-overdue cup of tea. The most powerful weapon against systemic bias and unchecked arrogance isn't always a louder voice or a bigger display of force. Sometimes the most devastating response is quiet, unshakable preparation. It is the deep understanding that truth, when properly documented and firmly held, will eventually outlast any narrative built on lies. The officers looked at a woman and saw an easy target. What they didn't realize was that they were staring at the architect of their own downfall. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If this video resonated with you, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next incredible deep dive. Share this video with someone who loves a story about true justice being served. And before you go, drop a comment below. What part of this story stood out to you the most? I read every single comment, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always know your rights. I'll see you in the next one.